Listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. It is 7:30, so we will go ahead and get started on tonight's training session. For those of you who have been on these in the past, I'm Neil McMahon, same guy that's been doing these for a little while. For anyone who's new, I'm a regional director in the Lottieland region, which is basically LA and to the east. Looking forward to having a good session tonight. We're going to do this one a little bit differently. I think most of the sessions we've done in the last year and years past, we have, I think, had a little bit more kind of specific sort of, topics to cover. Brainstorming and decision making is a little bit more of a general topic. So this one, I'm not sure how this is going to go. I'm hoping that we'll get some good questions from everybody. I didn't build in hopefully too much material. I didn't want to take up all the time with me talking because I think this one is one where hopefully we'll have some good situations from folks out in the audience to kind of bring in and ask about. So as we're going along, we will definitely take breaks throughout it to address questions. So you are welcome to use the chat function on your screen to ask the questions, and then, like I said, we'll stop and we'll go over those as we go along here. So looking forward to hopefully some good conversation and good discussion here tonight. So,
one point, could you please use the question area instead of the chat?
Oh, sorry, that's right. Apologies there. And also, just so everyone knows, I did forget tonight to introduce, that's also with me on the phone is Dick Penny. He is our affiliate director and wearer of many hats and the man that keeps this program running for us out here in California. So we'll go ahead and get to it here. So we're talking tonight about brainstorming and decision making. These are, while they are two definitely separate topics, I think they are very interrelated as well. So that's why we wanted to kind of do them together. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is, the importance of what these things are. Certainly brainstorming has a role in what we do, but why is it important? Why does it really matter? And why is it kind of a big driver of really creating successful, happy teams? And as we go through this, I definitely want to I will probably refer to this many times. To me, successful is not what place you come in at your tournament. Successful is, what did you achieve as a team that you wanted to achieve? Did you have fun while you were doing it? Did the kids learn some stuff? Was it a good experience for them? Certainly, I think placing well at tournaments is something that a lot of teams want to try and do, but I don't necessarily consider that a measure of success at the end of the year. I also want to talk about brainstorming and interference and how those two things relate, because I think it's an area where I think if I see team managers that take too far of a step back, I think this is one of those areas where a lot of them will really step too far back because they don't want to go across that interference line. So I think, if you're not sure, erring to the side of not interfering is the best thing, but I think there's some areas here where the team manager has a really important role and to really help them get involved. Talk then about decision making and why that has a big impact, and why it has an impact not just on solving the challenge, but really on the functioning of the team. And then hopefully a little bit on how, I think teams that make decisions well, kind of what we see in them and what are some things that they do in a process that maybe is different than teams that don't make good decisions. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about breaking a log jam, and that really can apply to anything that you're doing, whether it's decision making or building or creating, anything that's kind of going along, and just share with you a little bit about what I have learned over the years and what I've seen as some good best practices to kind of help that out, because that can be a real challenge when you have a team that's deadlocked on a decision and that type of thing. So that's where we're going to go tonight, and hopefully we'll get through all this material and give you some good stuff. So let's get started. So the importance of the brainstorming. So obviously beyond the obvious of why it's important to brainstorm, because these kids have to come up with some ideas, but it's really beyond just generating good ideas and, kind of getting some good stuff going that way. It's really important because how the team brainstorms is going to be a good indicator, and I think a good place for them to start to learn how to function well as a team. Certainly the brainstorming is one of the first activities that you are going to do as a team. So if you have a brand new team, certainly you'll be doing icebreakers and some instant challenge stuff and things like that in the beginning. But that brainstorming is really where you're going to spend a lot of the first few weeks, or month or whatever it's going to be that you're going to dedicate to the brainstorming piece. It's the first big thing that you challenge and you take on. So it's going to be important to do that right and to really help these kids kind of get into the groove, if you will, and to help them sort of understand that, because then as you learn those skills in brainstorming, then it becomes something that you can apply to lots of things down the road here. And also it builds the ideas up from ideas that are just fine to good ideas to great ideas. Brainstorming is more than just one kid, throwing an idea out and you guys going with it. It really is the process of generating the final idea. So it's really way more than just, coming up with a single idea. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I definitely want everyone to kind of think of brainstorming not as a single event, but as this long process. And I think also it creates that ability for your kids to kind of understand what this program's really trying to get them to do, which is just to let their guard down, feel comfortable with, kind of getting outside their own box, getting outside their own head, and really just, letting it go and realizing that it's okay to be silly. It's okay to be kind of, that's sort of a silly thing. That's a dumb idea. No, definitely not. And I think as we go through this, hopefully that you will kind of take that away, and hopefully you're already doing that to a certain extent, is that when you are brainstorming as a team, every idea is worthwhile. Every idea has value and merit and can spur on the greatest idea, or it might even be the greatest idea, and the kid who's coming up with it doesn't realize it because maybe they don't see something that somebody else does. So it's really important to get that sort of vibe going with your team. And I'm using words kind of like in the groove, the vibe. That's really what this thing is about, because brainstorming is something that, when you're having a good brainstorming session with your kids, you kind of get a buzz going. Your hair will stand up on your arms a little bit when they start going and they start popping together and coming with things. It's really a neat thing to do when it's done right and the kids all are working together and they're feeding off each other and the energy gets going. It's a very cool thing. And also this is one of those areas where this is a life skill. Brainstorming is not something that everybody's good at, and some people need to be taught how to do it, and some people need to practice it. But it's great because some kids may not think they have great ideas when they do have great ideas, so you have to be bringing them out, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but getting everybody involved and making everybody feel like they're contributing. And you don't want people just to feel like they're contributing when they're not, so you have to kind of figure out how to get everybody into that mix and how you get everybody to talk and go around, and so we can talk about that a little bit. And obviously them seeing the end product of the work of the brainstorm and realizing that creativity is not just something I thought of, but creativity is something I thought of, and then we took it and we put it with something else, and now we've come up with something that nobody's probably ever thought of before. And really driving the idea of what is creative and how to be creative to another level when you're working together with the other people, not just yourself. And that teamwork thing, obviously, I don't have to tell you how important that is to this thing working well. So that's definitely some things that I think. So don't underestimate the importance of this step in what you're going to do. And also realize that to a certain degree, you're never going to stop brainstorming through the year. All the way up to the end. I know with every team I've had, we've gotten to the point where we're, a few days away from tournament and somebody comes up with a really cool idea of something they want to do. And you have to kind of come to these conversations like, well, this is our last practice, so do you want to spend it building that or do you want to spend it practicing? They never stop brainstorming. They never stop coming up with ideas, and that's great. That's definitely what you want out of your team. So let's talk a little bit about your role within the brainstorming process, because like I said, this is an area where I think some team managers, and I've seen it, where they really just kind of set the kids down at the table and they kind of let them do it, and they don't engage, and they don't they don't affect the process. And this is one of these things where there's a difference between interfering and teaching. To me, interfering is sticking your ideas into the brainstorm, affecting the outcome of the brainstorm by, interjecting what you think is good or bad in an idea, or, doing things like, well, that's not going to work because it's not this or that, or, well, you should do that one. That one seems like a better idea than that one. That's interfering. What's not interfering is what I'm going to talk about right now, and things that you can do to teach them the process and help them evolve their own techniques and how they do it, and kind of helping them to drive a better outcome. This is the key to the brainstorming from your perspective. So you should sit down with them, since we're still fairly early in the process here, and really help them establish ground rules for brainstorming. And every team's going to be different here, but certainly there's some easy ground rules that you can get into. Is that, when somebody comes up with an idea, there is nobody that sits at the table and scoffs or says that's dumb or that's not going to work. Those kinds of things, the negative sort of reactions. You never, ever, ever want that. You got to set that tone around every idea is good. Because literally what may happen is somebody will come up with one little idea and you don't think much of it at the time, and then 10 minutes later, when you're kind of still working through things, somebody else might have just a little spark that connects with that one just a little bit, and then those two things start working together, and then there's a third kid that maybe makes a joke about something, and all of a sudden they all just sort of realize that, oh my gosh, we just connected these dots, and this is what we can do, and this is how we can solve it. But you know what? If that first stupid idea didn't get put out on the table that everybody thought was stupid at the time, you never get to the end result. So you have to understand that you don't know where the great idea is coming from. You just don't know. But if you set that tone of negativity, you're going to intimidate some of the kids at the table, and they're not going to want to speak. And we all know we have those, the ones that are a little bit shyer, especially for you who have younger kids, if they're rising stars, or if you have younger elementary teams. It's tough for some of those kids. Even when you get into middle school, you've got some kids that are just naturally shy, and so you're going to have to be careful not to, kind of set those kids back and crumble them down a little bit, because that can definitely happen if you don't do it right. The other piece of the brainstorming is that you have to ask questions. You have to find ways to drive the conversation without asking things that are going to give them answers. So those are general types of questions. It's like, okay, you want to build X. You want to build a giant elephant. Okay, great. All right, so if that's what you guys want to do. So what are you going to build it out of? Okay, how are you going to put those pieces together? How tall is it going to be? You have to ask them questions and get them thinking. You have to say, okay, you need to kind of flesh these things out, guys. It's great to have an idea, but part of brainstorming is taking that brainstorming down to the tactical level too, and figuring out how are you actually going to do it. Other things that you can do with asking questions, if especially when you're getting into places where maybe you're running, the kind of the ideas are running low and you're kind of running out of juice, is okay. Let's just stop for a second here. Let's assume that we have an unlimited budget. What would you do? And kind of change the model on them a little bit, get them thinking differently. Or let's assume that you don't actually know how to build it. Okay, so you don't actually need to know how this is going to come together. What would you do? And sort of take some of the restraints off them and let them start going in new directions, and then you can kind of take those things and help bring those back. It's like, okay, you came up with all these great ideas. All right, turns out we don't have $10,000 for our budget. But are there things in these ideas you guys just came up with that you can adapt to a lower budget? Are there ideas in here that you can use that you might be able to build? And the kids will draw those lines back, and they'll find ways back to something that's workable. You have to really kind of drive that along, but if you don't give them those kinds of scenarios, a lot of times they won't do it themselves, because they're going to start to fall into the restraints a little bit, and that's what you don't want. Not during brainstorming. Brainstorming, you want to be open and free, and them just to sort of splat stuff up on the wall. And that's key. That is really crucial, because you want them to think differently, and you want them to kind of do things. Or you maybe have like a bunch of just sort of simple ideas on the board, and go, okay, we're going to do something fun here. You're going to take 3 of those ideas on the board each and come up with something else. or different things like that. It's almost like you're giving them homework as they're brainstorming. They don't realize that's what's happening, but that's what you're doing. So you're creating scenarios to drive the thinking forward and get more ideas coming out that are going to work. Because if you don't do that, sometimes you get stuck. And I think it's key that that you want to take that different thinking and take that different ideas, because they're capable of more than the first idea usually. We all know that there's, when I have worked with my team, we've always kind of looked at it as there's sort of 3 different levels of ideas. There's the idea that just pops out of your head when you get asked for an idea. That's the idea that most people will come up with. So it's kind of a first level idea. And then you think about it a little bit and you start to get creative and you start to do these other things like, oh, well, we could do that and you could do that. So there's this another level of ideas that take a little bit of thought, a little bit of doing. And then somewhere above that, there's a 3rd level of idea when you're working with the other kids and you're putting things together. And that's the ideas that, really start to click and really start to feel different when you hear them and you think about them and that kind of thing. And so that's definitely, what you're trying to get them to. So the other piece of your role, which I think is also very, very important, and I think a lot of people do this, but not everybody does it, is you should be documenting the ideas for the kids. It takes time to write stuff down, and you don't want to sort of take away from their functioning, their brainstorming, their thinking by having one of them stop and write it down. And honestly, for a lot of kids, they're not real good at writing stuff on boards. You might not be great at it either, but you want to just go ahead and do that and make sure that you're writing stuff down. The picture you see here on the screen, this is a picture of a corner of my garage where we slap everything up on the board that we've been thinking about and talking about and working on. And you can see there's just a whole bunch of gobbledygook and mush on there, and most of those papers are 2 or 3 papers deep by the time we get to the end of the season, because we've just had lots of ideas and lots of things that we're coming to. Because if you don't write the stuff down, they're not going to remember it. And then you're going to be put in a situation where you can either remind them of it, which then I think you run the risk of interfering, or you can say, why don't you go look at the piece of paper that we did the other night, and you can look at it. I mean, my kids are older, and they forget stuff they said 3 minutes ago. And I'm not kidding. It happened. I mean, you know how that goes with kids. They're like, oh, what? I said that? Well, we wrote it down over here, so I think you did. I don't know. Did you say that? Did I write that down wrong? No, that's what I said. You're right. Okay. But if you don't write it down, then how are you going to be able to go back to these things and tap into these things and use them as you go? So definitely do that. What I like to do is I go to the beginning of the season and buy a couple of those, pads of paper at Office Depot or wherever you can get them cheap, and a quick little pack of 4 or 5 Sharpie markers of different colors, and that lasts me for the season. And I just use them, and we write them, and we scribble, and they draw, and they tell me what to draw, and we get pictures up there, and we do lists, and we throw pieces away, we rewrite things, we do all kinds of stuff. But it's important to do that because it gives them that good source of always reverting back to it. It's the database that's there. There are certainly other ways to keep good documents like that. I know some coaches that will kind of do it on a computer so that they can email things around to the kids. That certainly is one. This is a personal preference of mine because the kids are in the garage and they're working, and it's in front of them all the time. And so I like that ability to kind of sit there and have them all stare at the same paper all the time. But it's definitely up to you as far as how your preference works with that. But definitely do it some way, somehow. The other thing is keeping focus. This one can be challenging sometimes. A couple of ideas when you're keeping focus is, if you're kind of running into some tricky parts or it's sort of slowing down, you can always sort of manage the time, take breaks. Different teams are able to do this for longer periods of time than others. Feeding them sometimes works for some teams. Not feeding other teams works. That's going to be up to you to find out how's the best way to keep their focus. Sometimes they're just in a silly, giggly mood, so sometimes you got to let them go really silly and giggly and just get it all out. Sometimes they're squirrely. Let them go run around in the front yard for a couple minutes. Sometimes they're just no energy, so maybe go do an instant challenge to wake them up or have them do something that's going to get them going. But definitely find ways to kind of keep it fresh and keep it moving and keep it focused. If they're starting to chitter and chatter, try and bring them back. Do different things. There's a lot that you can do there. Next one, there's getting the most from everyone. There is a definite risk, I think, especially on teams with younger kids, where you're going to have some kids that are more assertive and I will even use the word more dominant on some teams than others. You really want to be careful of that, and I don't believe the way to do it is to have the kid who has those lots of ideas to sort of knock them down. The idea is to try and create an environment where those other people can insert their opinions as well. So you're really trying to lift everybody up to the best level versus trying to push somebody down to make everybody equal. There are certain personalities that are out there, and seen it on teams where there's kids that just are domineering, and that's something you gotta watch out for, because you do not want someone to run over the top of another team member because they feel like their idea is the best. Or I've seen it where, even in instant challenges and things where kids will just be like, well, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And it's like, okay, well, this is a team, so we got to work together here and make sure that everybody's being inclusive in this. And because if you're not being inclusive and you're not giving everyone that chance to talk, you're going to miss out on some things, and you're going to have ideas that are going to get left on the floor, and they're never going to get seen, and they're never going to get heard, and that hurts your team, and it hurts everybody on the team. So make sure that you're doing that. Sometimes it's helpful to, when you're doing brainstorming, is to go around the table and say, okay, everybody's going to come up with something here, and kind of make sure that they go around in an order. I think one of the things that you can also do here, and this is one that you should be really careful with because you don't want to interfere, but sometimes it's okay to maybe make a bigger deal out of one person's idea, just not that it's a great idea, but I really like the way you said that, or something, just to trying to help point out the people who need some help, because it is your job to kind of bring everybody along. So if you're not comfortable doing that and you're afraid you're going to interfere, don't do it, but it's certainly an option that you can do, and make sure that you're doing that. And if you do have kids that continue to kind of subvert the whole brainstorming as a team, that's maybe something that you want to bring up with them after practice or before practice, with their parents, whatever you want to do. You decide if it's important, if it's a problem enough to do it, but it's something that you should really be cognizant of, because we've seen some really good kids and some really good teams just get blown up by one kid that's sort of driving over the top, and this is where it starts. This is where it starts, because you got to let everybody know that they're working together. And then finally, you have to bring the brainstorming to a conclusion at some point. It is great to sit there for weeks and weeks and weeks and brainstorm and brainstorm and brainstorm, but sooner or later you got to come up with an idea that you like. And we'll talk about how to sort of drive from brainstorm there, but make sure that they're always working towards the end goal. So sometimes you have to remind them of that, like, hey guys, we're building an elephant here, right? Yeah, okay. So what are we doing on that? Let's go back to that. What are we doing there? We're talking about the trunk today, right? Okay, good. Well, how are we building this trunk? Let's talk about that. So bring them down. We talked about earlier, keeping the focus on, driving them to the end result. That's definitely something that you want to make sure that you're doing constantly with them. So just threw a lot at you. Dick, do you want to just take a pause and see if there's any questions out there for anybody?
Right at the moment, there aren't any questions. There was just one question by a team,
Okay.
from a team manager, but I was able to answer. It was just related to their situation. It was mechanical. Perfect. Okay.
You got it. Okay. We'll keep on pushing through then. Excellent. Okay. So this one, this is a little bit of a review. I talked about this a little bit. Like I said, we're just kind of working through this thing, but when you brainstorm with the team, it is a high energy team sport, I like to say. So if you're going to be brainstorming, make sure you're getting these kids pumped up and make sure you're driving that input from everybody like we talked about. But like I said, the great ideas are so rare that they come start to finish from one person. And make sure that everybody's listening to everyone's ideas. And sometimes you get kids sitting around, you're going to get the little sidebar conversations, a little bit of chatter. That's okay sometimes, because sometimes they're talking about ideas, but you got to make sure that everybody's catching all the ideas so that something else doesn't happen down the road. Or 3 ideas later, you start talking about something and building it onto the idea that just came up, and these 2 kids that were sitting over here on the right, they weren't listening, so they have no idea what you're talking about. So then they start arguing with everyone else because they don't understand what was there, causes issues. So make sure everyone's listening. Sometimes that means that you stop and go, hey, say that again. I don't think everybody heard you. Okay, everybody heard that? Good. Let's keep moving then. um, you know, and then another way that I try and encourage it on my team is when you hear an idea, rather than thinking what you don't like about it, because I honestly I believe a lot of us as humans are sort of taught, or we learn that behavior of thinking about what's bad about this, what don't I like, what's not going to work. Sometimes it's better to all right, so we're going to do a little exercise here, and we're going to come up with some ideas, and when the idea comes up, then we're going to go back around the table, and everybody else is going to tell me something they like about that idea. And that can be hard sometimes because, if you got to come up with 4 or 5 or 6 different things you like about one single idea, well, that takes creative brainstorming too. But it's a really good exercise to go through because then you can start them thinking down these roads of what can I take from that idea. And if you do it enough times, they'll just start naturally thinking about it. Sure, they'll think about the things that aren't going to work or why that won't happen or whatever. And, you're going to have to brainstorm the problems that could come up too. But originally, you want to make sure you're brainstorming all those positives because I think that's just it gets back to that setting a tone and creating this environment that encourages everybody. If people are saying what they like about an idea, it starts to make people feel better about it. So, okay, that really isn't such a bad idea. And then this next one, this actually was one of my assistant managers who kind of brought this to the table one time, and it was a few years back when my kids were all in middle school, and it was actually the year that they all went through puberty together with us. It was an interesting, emotional year. They're all boys, and you wouldn't think boys would quite have the same reaction, but it was very emotional, tough year, and there was little snipings and things that would be happening, and people would be getting upset because somebody didn't like my idea and this and the other thing. And the way that he put it is that your idea, when you state it, when it comes out of your mouth, you have given it to the team as a gift. And think about when you give somebody a gift. When you give somebody a gift, you don't get to control what they do with your gift, and you don't get to get upset if they take your gift and and they don't play with it all the time, or they do play with it all the time. That's great, or they use it or they don't use it. It's a gift. You gave it to them. And that's kind of what ideas are with your team. You give your idea to the team, and the team sometimes will take your idea and they will use all of it, and they will love it, and it will become the best idea ever. Sometimes they might take a little bit of it. Sometimes they might not take any of it. And you don't get to get upset about it because it's not your idea anymore. It's the team's idea. And the team's going to do with it what the team thinks is best. So it's really about teaching the kids to kind of check the ego during this brainstorming, because some kids will get upset when we don't pick their idea. And that can't be part of this, because this is not a fight. This is not a battle. This isn't you versus me. This is us working together. So, I strongly recommend that you create that idea that, you're giving it up. It's not yours anymore. It's one thing on the board. And while you're always invested in what you personally do, you have to understand that you're personally involved in what the team does more at this point. And it gets to a pretty big concept, and I think that's one of those concepts that the teams that are really good, that do things well, have all kids that kind of buy into that concept of, I'm part of something larger here, and I am part of something that I contribute to, but it is not all me. It's everybody, and I need everybody else, and they need me, and we work together. And this is really an area where that can get highlighted very strongly, either for the positive or the negative. So this can go one of two ways. It can really be a tough thing because you've got a couple kids on a team that, maybe they get really pushed out of shape when their idea doesn't get used, and then they pout for an hour, or they cry, and they do that. I mean, I've had kids on my team that do that, and it's very tough to manage. And you really have to kind of try and get it into this sort of idea that, come on, we're giving this up to people. So, and then continue to push them to build things together, to take things and put them on top of each other, and take pieces of one and build it with another, and definitely get back to that sort of asking questions and creating these exercises that you can do. Okay, take 2 of these on the board and put them together. What are you going to do? What are some ways we can combine these things? And just have them start thinking about it that way. And then I got it down here where you're building to the moment of aha. And for folks who have been through this before, done this before, hopefully you know what I'm talking about here. when you're in the middle of brainstorming and you're trying to come up with ideas for things, especially the big things and the ideas that are going to drive the central solution and all of these things, every once in a while, somebody at the table will come up with an idea that literally makes you stop in your head and go, oh, ha ha. And it's a kind of a magical thing, and I don't want to sort of, I know that sort of sounds silly, but it isn't. It's one of those things where when you hear it and when you see it and when it happens, you know it happened. And that's why you push the kids a little bit when it comes to brainstorming, and you get them to kind of go a few levels up and just keep going a little bit, because they will stumble upon these things sometimes. Sometimes it's on purpose. Sometimes it's just something that they spit out of their mouth, and everyone just goes, oh my gosh. And they know it, and they know when they hear it. And, you know, it's one of these things where I have bit my tongue many times at the table, because I don't want them to know that I know that's the best idea that anybody has had in 6 weeks, because it's just that good of an idea. But it's a really cool thing to do. And, you know, we kind of talk about those different levels of ideas. There's that first level that everybody has. There's that second level that, you know, you can probably come up with on your own, you know, if you work a little bit and think about it. Then there's that third level that you need other people to build up to. And then somewhere up above there is that aha, is that, oh, that moment, and you get it, and it's amazing. And it just, you talk about energizing the kids. When they come off a brainstorming session where they've had one of those ideas, they are empowered and they feel like they can just do anything, because it's like, oh my gosh, Mom, do you know what we just came up with today? I mean, I've heard them when their parents come to pick them up after one of those. It's the coolest thing, that they really do dig that. So definitely know that that's out there, and feel that, you know, you do want to push them a little bit, and you want them to kind of know that there's things that they're capable of that are not going to be instantaneous and easy. So definitely kind of know that that's there. So before we jump into the decision-making piece of it, questions about the brainstorming? Anything? One more try? You can always go back to it.
Okay, there's just one question. Is there any recommended number of practice sessions per week? This has to, you know, more of a team management.
Certainly. I would say that it just depends on your team. I don't know how old the team is. I would say if they're younger kids, you know, recommended, depends on how much you want to get done. I would say the average team is probably meeting once a week. Younger kids, so, you know, like third, fourth graders, rising stars, maybe an hour and a half, because that's about all they're really capable of, you know, focusing and being energetic. As they get older, a little bit longer. I would say there are some pretty highly motivated teams that meet twice a week. And then I would say whatever age group your team is, or however many times you meet, just know full well that sometime about a month out from your tournament, you're going to meet more than whatever you're meeting now, because you're going to realize that there's just a lot to do that hasn't gotten done, and the kids are going to want to kind of get it all finished, and you're going to do some scrambling, and you want to do some practicing. So plan on meeting more as you get past the first of the year. That's usually kind of the time, that first full week after the first of the year. It will be a difficult, dark time for all of us, because you'll realize, oh my gosh, look at all this work that still needs to be done, and the tournament's only X days away. But that happens. It happens to every team. Happens every year. Doesn't matter how many years you've been doing it. We'll be here to talk you off the ledge at that point. But definitely, I would say once or twice a week, depending on your team, is probably the good number. And then you'll know, you know, kind of what your kids can handle from a time perspective. I will say, no matter how much time you meet, you'll fill it. So, you know, it really depends on the dedication of the team and how much they want to, you know, how much they want to drive it and how hard they want to push it.
Okay, that's the
all right.
That's the only question.
All right. So it must be Thursday night. I know we do some of these on Tuesday nights. It seems like we get more questions on Tuesday nights. So, but I know how I feel on Thursday night. So we'll kind of keep moving here. So, all right. So decision making. This definitely is just to me, is a continuation of brainstorming, because in a way, the natural progression of brainstorming is coming to a final decision, and I think the front end of decision making is having ideas that start it. So to me, these are really one long continuum. but I think that the decision making, while it has some definite similarities, also I think requires some different approaches. I think some more tactical things versus the brainstorming, which I think is more open-ended and really rolling forward. I think this is where you kind of have to start to, boil it down, get them moving, doing those types of things. So I think a few things around decision making, and I think certainly the impacts of how your team behaves and what your team does and how they do things is really impacted by how they decision make. The brainstorming and decision making have a lot of impact on, I think instant challenge is certainly an area where this happens. The teams that make decisions very effectively and very efficiently are typically pretty darn good at instant challenge, because that's a big part of that, is a team that can, collect data, put it together, churn out a few ideas, and then come to a decision and do that in a very short time frame, and then move forward from there with a positive attitude and a team framework, will do well in instant challenge. Teams that don't have that ability yet will struggle in instant challenge, because it's really a big part of it. If you have different sets of ideas that are competing and egos that are bumping up to stuff, that's going to be a problem in those types of things. And I think also as you go along in your solve for your central challenge, every single week you're going to have to make decisions. There's going to be things that are going to have to get decided as you're building and you're engineering things out and you're creating things. You're going to have to figure out as a team, how are you going to do this? And the kids are going to have to be working together. And if they don't learn those effective tools to make these decisions, that makes it so much harder. So this, I think, is something that you can definitely get a lot of payback on the investment you're going to put into, taking some time and working through this decision making. So, and once again, the line between interference and managing. It's the line between affecting how the decision gets made and affecting what decision gets made. So affecting what decision gets made is interfering. Affecting how they make the decision is not interfering. That's being a team manager, and that's teaching them the skills. So definitely make sure you are getting involved in this and you're helping them do this, and you don't let it just kind of linger out there. And it's not just to say, okay, guys, we got to make a decision. What are you going to do? Sometimes that works. Most of the time, especially on big things, that's tough. I've seen teams that will take a month deciding what challenge they're going to do. That's too long. As a team manager, you need to empower that team to make a decision and help them make that decision. So we'll talk a little bit about some ways that you can kind of do that, because I understand with groups of 4, 5, 6, 7 young people, coming to a decision that makes everybody happy sometimes can be a near impossibility. So you have to figure out ways to manage it and ways to be able to make those decisions and move on without a lot of hurt feelings and bad blood between the kids. So first one here is be wary of alliances within your team, especially if you've got kids who come as very close friends. I've seen it definitely as well with teams with boys and girls. Sometimes when it comes down to this sort of stuff, is they're going to naturally sort of defend their own, if you will. So if you have 2 ideas at the end of the day, and one of them came from the 3 girls and one of them came from the boys will take the boys and the girls will take the girls. Doesn't always happen, but be aware of your own team's dynamic as far as that kind of stuff is concerned. Sometimes it can be as simple to diffuse that as where does everybody sit when they're at the table. If you go boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, yeah. If you got 2 people who are real buds and chum, and you put them on opposite sides of the table so they can't talk to each other without everybody talking with them, that kind of stuff can be helpful. So different ways to kind of just something to be aware of and know that that's how it's going to happen. The other next piece of this is really to teach the team how to evaluate what they're deciding on. And this gets back to similar to the brainstorming, is you got to ask a lot of questions. Okay, so we have choice A and choice B. So let's talk about this. All right, I want everyone to kind of dig in here. Let's understand what's going on here. All right, what are the good things about this? What are the bad things about this? What are the good things about this one? What about the bad things about this one? Do we have to use all of one and all of the other, or are there ways to combine things, or are there other ideas that we haven't thought about that you want to bring into this? Because sometimes an idea can pop into a kid's head, and it might take the 2 that are on the table and wipe them out and take a third one over. and talk about big picture versus the detail, because sometimes what you're going to find out is that maybe there's this one kid who's really dug in, and he or she's just dug in on this one thing. It's like, I don't want that one, I want this one. And then you kind of find out it's really just because the kid really likes, butterflies, and he wanted to go with the butterfly. He says, well, we could use butterflies over here. Oh, okay, well, yeah, we'll go and do that. That'll be great. And, then they're happy-go-lucky and they're moving along. But so you got to kind of get to those big picture things and the details at this, you got to work through both at the same time, help them evaluate, help them understand big picture, small picture, what's really important here. If we're building something to do a function of X, what about this choice and what about this choice is really crucial to the actual end functioning, and then what is optional? And if it's optional, then we have the ability maybe to plug and play and use that on different things, and so I kind of teach them to think about it a little bit differently, and then they'll start to combine things in their own head, and then that helps them get away from it. The other big thing here is to really take that emotion out of the process. It's hard because these are their ideas, and they love their ideas, and they have ego, and they have pride, and those are very real emotions, and they are very real things that happen when you're trying to defend your idea against somebody else's idea, even if they're on your team. So this is something that you have to just be wary of, and I think, to address with the kids, and acknowledge it, like, hey, you like that idea, I understand that, that's a cool idea. Sometimes just saying it is enough to help them sort of get over it, and sometimes it's just something you got to be aware of, and you got to know that, hey, I know that Jared really loves that idea. So maybe if Jared's having a really hard time getting over it, maybe during one of your breaks you can talk to Jared and go, hey, look, man, I know you really dug into your idea, but the other 5 people are really loving this idea over here. And oh, I know, but this, I really, and it's like, and then you can help him understand, or help her understand, that it's not the end of the world that this didn't get used for this. Maybe it can get used for something else down the road, you don't know. And then they can kind of keep it in the back of their mind. So you're bargaining with them, certainly, all the time. It's consensus and compromise, right? Sometimes you're giving stuff up to get stuff. Sometimes it's just, hey, put it to the side and maybe we'll use it later. And then, a couple of days later they might forget about it. A couple of days later they may not, and they may think of something to use it for. So definitely, help them manage through that process. And sometimes it's a point of like, look, we're kind of stuck here. Do we think that there's a way to use them both? Or is there a way to combine them? Are there ways that you can do those things? So you're kind of asking them questions and you're getting them to think differently. Sometimes they'll do it on their own. Sometimes you have to force them together. And sometimes you're just going to have to cut a deal. And we'll talk a little bit more about breaking log jams up, and something that I have found is very successful to sort of establish these things and to kind of get over that. So, and then if you have examples where you've done decisions in the past, or you've done things like last week or yesterday or 10 minutes ago, that maybe you came up with something that was better, constantly refer to those things. Use examples. Hey, you remember 2 weeks ago when we were, and everybody was squabbling about what we were going to use, a feather or a fan, and you remember how we wound up using, I don't know, a butterfly, and how cool that was? Yeah, well, you know what? That's what we're trying to do here, guys. We're trying to figure out how we get all these ideas together and make something work. And, you're selling to them all the time, trying to get them to buy into the process. And I think as soon as they start to see the process and they start to buy into it and they start to realize that they're part of something that's bigger than them, and that everything they're doing is all driving towards the common goal, and sometimes that means that your stuff gets used, sometimes you step aside and let somebody else's get used, and that's okay too, because you're all here together, you're all working for the same thing. I'm not saying that works every time, because I get it, you've got emotions here, but you'll see that last one at the bottom. Sometimes you're going to have to make that call, and you're going to have to manage this team. And if you have one kid who's problematic or refuses to sort of buy into the concept, you're just going to have to move on past it, and then you're going to have to deal with the repercussions of that kid. Sometimes you've got kids who may have some behavioral issues. Sometimes you've got kids that just don't deal well with it. Sometimes you've got kids that are spoiled brats. And sometimes you have kids that are just, they're sensitive and they get really upset by it. So that piece of this is something where you're going to have to kind of understand the kid a little bit, and you're going to have to manage it depending on their situation. Sometimes it's the fact of, after you get done with that decision, you take a break and you kind of take a minute and you help them feel better. Sometimes you take a break and you kind of take them over by themselves and you kind of explain to them, look, you're going to have to learn to deal with this. It's going to depend on how old the kids are, and that's going to be up to you. You're going to have to be careful with it. Sometimes it's an issue, and I've had this happen before where I've had to, make an extra stop at the kid's house the day after practice and sit down with his parents and have a conversation that, we work as a team here, and this is not the behavior that's going to help this team. And, hopefully you don't have to do that, but I've done it before because the team needed me to do that, and the team needed to get that negative behavior and that tension out of the way. Because it's just, once you start going down that path, it's cancerous to the whole process. And it really takes a lot of the fun out of doing this when you got one kid that's just always grumpy or always pouting or always crying. It's tough because the other kids don't want that. They want that kid to be part of the team. They want that kid to be in the mix and having a good time and smiling and laughing and joking. And so doing what you can do to try and get them down that road is going to be important. So, so this is, I think, one of those things where the process then is something that's going to evolve specifically for your team. It's certainly something I think that each team focuses on different things that are important to them. Certain processes of how you make decisions and kind of get there, but I think these are definitely some of the things that are pretty common throughout all of those themes. Is, we talked a little bit about this on the last slide, is what is the problem you are solving here? So you guys are dug in on these things. We've got these three options. We got to figure out which one's the best. So sometimes it makes sense to take a step backwards and go all the way back to the beginning and have them refresh their brains on what the heck are you trying to do here? Because honestly, they'll forget sometimes, So you've got a specific thing in your challenge that you're brainstorming on. You're trying to figure out what's the best path to take here. Take them back and ask them, what did the challenge say that you had to do? And read it or have them talk about it. Do those things, because you know what? One or two of the kids may have gotten a little fuzzy on what exactly the thing needed to do. You may have a kid at the table who doesn't even remember what the hell it was supposed to do. It'd be like, I don't know. No idea. Can't even remember. Okay, let's go back and read. Oh, that's right, it was doing that. Because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want the kids to kind of get down to this decision-making process and not know what they're deciding upon and why they're doing it. And so once you kind of make sure everyone's good on that, is then talk about those advantages and disadvantages. What's good about these things? What's not good about them? What's going to be difficult about these things? And hopefully that will start to create these value judgments for each of them, and they can kind of put them all on the scales and weigh them out next to each other and sort of bring that down. And so as that's coming, as there's not clear winners, or maybe there's a couple that are good, then, all right, well, can we take things that are good from both of these? We've kind of identified all these good things about each of these choices. Do we see things that are common on these? Are there ways we can build them together? Are there things that you can do? What do you guys think about that? What do you want to do with this? That's how you do this. This is where that whole scribing and writing things down becomes really important, because you want them to start to visualize sort of the pluses and minuses. So, you creating charts up on the board where it's like, here's the pluses, here's the minuses, here's the four things we're talking about, and then start listing stuff out. And then they can go back and refer to it and talk to it and, think about it. And it helps them. A lot of people are visual people. And, you can talk to people all you want, but if they don't see it, they're not going to get it. And so that visual representation of the evaluation is important to a lot of people. So make sure you're doing that. We'll help them do that. And then, it's always a good idea when you're going through this, is there anything else? Did somebody come up with something else? And I tell you, they'll come up with other things. And I've had it happen. We've spent, a couple weeks on a major brainstorm and coming up with all these things, and we've got these ideas, and they're okay, but nothing really feels right. And it's just, is there anything else? And some kid will just say, oh, I was thinking about such and such. And it turns out that's the one that you wind up going with. So don't ever shut it down. Always be kind of refreshing it, but also be pushing it forward. It's a delicate balance. You don't want to spend so much time that all you do is brainstorm for months and months and months, but you don't want them to ever feel like they can't come up with a new idea, because that will sort of defeats the purpose of the whole thing as well. So Dick, break here for questions.
Yes, we have a question. We have a couple, in fact. The first one I have here that I want to bring this up right away. Someone reported that the sound went out. Natalie Ackerman said her sound went out. It might be something on her end because I have my iPhone and my iPad also connected, as if I'm a attendee, and the sound is coming through, and I'm connecting through a whole different way. So it must be local for her.
Yeah, I mean, if there was any piece of it that you missed and you want me to go back over it, just let us know. I'm happy to revisit whatever just came in. Hopefully, it was just a very temporary problem.
Mm-hmm. And this is being recorded, so she can always download the video later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now the next one is about a Rising Stars team. I've got a Rising Star team that just never manages to keep consensus. Is there some value in assigning a decision maker, or maybe rotating that role week to week?
I think it is. It's definitely an idea that I've toyed with myself a little bit. I think it's a little bit. I don't know if it's the best solution. I would say as a last resort, you can definitely go there. I mean, you can always do it. But I think the risk that you run is that if you have, I wouldn't recommend assigning a decision maker period. I think if you're going to do it, you would definitely want to rotate it and let everybody take a shot at it and sort of let everybody kind of manage and try and do it. But I think also being as it's a Rising Star team, they're obviously much younger. They're obviously going to have a different sort of sophistication to their decision making and their value judgment. So I think it's one of those things where you should probably, I would try and help them a little bit more through the process of the evaluation and maybe help them list things out and kind of go from there. That might be a helpful way to do it, is really just to break the decisions down into such a level of detail that the answer is going to come out the end whether they want it to or not. I think that there are other ways you could do it. Honestly, this is one of these things where, especially for the younger ones, sometimes blind voting works. As long as you have an odd number of kids on your team, you'll never get a tie. Even when you have even numbers of teams, a lot of times you won't. And I think when they vote together, you get influences from other people that influence votes. And when they put their heads down and just raise their hands and blind vote, you get a more true opinion. And you'll surprise yourself. It'll really surprise you sometimes how kids vote when you're having lots of decisions making. So sometimes it's something as simple as that. You kind of got the laughing one there, the time-tested decision-making system. You know what? Sometimes if it's not a big decision that you're making, and kids are sort of on the fence, and okay, well, you know what? Instead of spending 10 minutes on whether we're going to do this thing in blue or yellow, we're flipping a coin. Everyone good with that? Okay, we flip a coin. Boom, it's blue. Let's go. It's done. We just saved ourselves 10 minutes. You're going to know your team. You're going to know how deep you got to go on some of these decisions, but it's definitely something that, you want to try and find ways to get to the consensus, to get to the decision. And consensus doesn't mean unanimous. Keep that in mind. It just means that it's the majority decision. If you're always looking for all 5 kids to vote for the same thing, you're going to have a very difficult time getting that. If you're looking for 4 out of 5 kids to get to it, that's tough too. 3 out of 4 or 3 out of 5, we'll take it. And we're going to move forward because the majority wanted this, and that's how this stuff works. It's something that the sooner they sort of get used to trying to work with the group and going with the group decision, I think the better off they're going to be. But I do feel for you there, and I think as the younger ones, especially with the Rising Stars, because it is a different concept of interference with Rising Stars because you're in a non-competitive environment, and you are trying to teach at this point. I think that I would feel more comfortable with a Rising Star team to kind of help them a little bit more through the process than I would with a team that was at the competitive levels, because it's a different impact there than it is at the Rising Star level. Dick, any other questions?
Yes, there's one other. How head-on should you tackle best friends? Sensitive souls, or talk it through with kids, or instead parents?
My preference is to always try and work it out with the kids first and foremost. I only go to the parents when I feel like I can't get it done at the level of the manager and the kids. I think that sometimes best friends are tricky. I agree, especially if you have other kids on the team that are from outside the circle, if you will. So maybe you've got 2 kids that are really best buds, or 3 kids that are really best friends, and then you got these other 2 kids that were interested in DI and they kind of came to the team. That can be very challenging, and I think that you have to appeal to, I would say, I guess to answer the question, I would take it head on. I wouldn't necessarily address it day one, but it's one of those things we talked about earlier, is keeping an idea of your own team's dynamics. You have to think about that and what's going on with these kids. If you got boys and girls, and you got kids that are 11 and 12, you know, you've got boy-girl things going on there, and that could be causing an issue. You got best friends, that's another one. You've got kids that maybe are, you know, a little bit shy and outside the group. So what are you going to have to do to account for that? You need to be aware of those things and making sure that you're trying to manage the dynamics. So I would say head on is the best way. If you've got kids that are, you know, I talked about earlier, is beware of those alliances. You know, if you got 2 kids that are like that, or 3 kids, split them up. Just, you know what, when you sit down at the table, nope, you're over there now. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking charge of your team. There's something wrong with interfering with their creativity and their ideas and that part of it, but you are in charge of this team, make no doubt about that, and there's nothing wrong with that kind of management of the dynamics of the team, because that sort of dynamic will tear the team down, it'll slow it down, it makes it harder, it makes it less fun. It's supposed to be fun for you too. And if all you're doing is managing the bickering and the sniping and that kind of thing, that's not fun. So, you know, it's okay to take those sorts of steps. And you know what, if they're chit-chatting about stuff, it's like, hey, you guys are going to be Skyping later, so go ahead and deal with that later. We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about this. You know, I mean, you don't go screaming and yelling at kids ever, but it's okay to take charge and be directive on that stuff. So I would definitely say, if you see it and you know it's a problem, or you know it's going to be a problem, definitely address it. You know, I think that splitting them up doesn't work. I think talking to them first is great. Maybe talking to them one at a time is great as well. And then if all of that stuff is failing and it's still not happening, and you got to go talk to the parents about it, talk to the parents about it. If that doesn't work, then have a sit down with the parents and the kids. And you know, you don't ever, and I hope that nobody ever gets to this point, but if it worse comes to worse, you sit down and have that conversation and go, if you can't change this behavior, you can't be on this team. And that's a tough one to do. But I did it one time. I had a kid on the team that just wasn't into it and didn't want to do it. And, you know, when he kind of realized that, oh, I got to be a member of the team, well, he was a member of the team after that, and he was fine. But, you know, understand that you have a lot of tools at your disposal when it comes to managing that dynamic, because when that dynamic starts to fall apart, it gets so tough indeed. Anything else, Dick?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Good questions. Very good questions. All right. So, breaking a logjam. And certainly you'll have lots of things where you can't get the decision made. On the little things, I wouldn't recommend what I'm going to kind of go through here, but when you're talking about big things, when you're talking about what challenge are we going to do, what is the, you know, the big direction of our central solution, you know what I mean, the things that are really important, the big things. What is the plot of our skit? You know, big things that you really are going to affect lots and lots and lots of stuff. this is a solution that we came up with on our team that has been, luckily my kids are older. We don't have to do this anymore because they understand. But we use this many, 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 many times. So basically the way it works is that I would go through for whatever it is that we're doing and have the kids create a criteria of how you would evaluate whatever the decision is. And so that could be a whole host of things, and I would help them through this and help them, kind of figure out what's really important here. So if you're doing the technical challenge and you're building a machine, what are the considerations for this machine? Certainly things like the effectiveness of the idea. How difficult is it going to be to build? How expensive is it going to be to build? How reliable do you think it will be? How strong will this thing be? If it's a skit, how interesting will it be to watch? Which one's going to be, how funny do you think this skit will be? How complicated is it going to be? Do you like the interesting topic? Whatever the kids are going to sort of come up with, just before you start, have them come up with 8 or 10, different criteria. Write them down. And I would recommend doing somewhere around 10 because you want to have a multiple number here because it will help when you get to the end of this thing. And then you go through blind evaluation of each and every one of these points as you go down the list. And the way we've done it a couple of different ways. I think to get a good comparison with it, you kind of go down the entire list for each of your choices. So everybody puts their head down on the table and you rank everything from 1 to 5. If you want to do 1 the best or 5 the best, whatever you want to do, doesn't matter. But they go through, and so you start with choice A. Choice A, criteria 1. It's reliability. What do you think that's going to be on a scale? It's going to be a 4. It's going to be a 3. It's going to be a 5. And the kids will all rank them. Just hold up your fingers. You don't have to tell me. Just hold up your fingers, and you just scribble them down. Takes a couple minutes, but you get through the whole thing, and everybody's rated each one. And basically what you do is you just total up the scores. And whichever one gets the best score is the winner, period. End of discussion. And you buy into that as a team before you start the process. So you don't just do it and then get to the end and go, okay, that's what we're doing. You say, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to rate these things. After they've come up with the criteria, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to rate each one of these things for each one of them. And then when we get to the bottom, whichever one scores best is the one we're going to use. Everybody good with that? And if somebody's not good with it, then you can kind of talk through it. Okay, why isn't that a fair, process? Help them understand or help them, verbalize why they don't think it's fair. And sometimes they might have a good point. You go, okay, that's a good point. So how do we address that? And then you can kind of figure it out. So you're really sort of brainstorming and driving through the process just like you do everything else. But you get to the end of that, and one of those choices will win and the other ones will not. Now, does that mean you just crumple up and throw the other things away? Now you say, we'll keep these over here because we might come up with some things to pull off of these and scrap and things like that. But this is what we're doing, guys. And now all of you are behind this idea, and we're not going to whine about it, and we're not going to, throw a fit. We're not going to do all this stuff. This is what you got. Everybody good with this? Okay. Then you go through the exercise and you do it. It's very effective because it's fair and it's thorough, and also you're going to have some kids that don't want the choice that wins, and they've bought in and agreed that this is where we're going, and so it helps to sort of break that ego and the me thing down and gets into the team a little bit better, and it keeps you moving. So I highly recommend it. It does take a few minutes when you do it. It usually takes about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. But when you get to the end of it, it's probably a quicker way to get to those big decisions when you just can't get it, through the normal channels and get them to agree to something. It's a great way to break it loose. And it also is a way for the kids to sort of voice their opinions when maybe they don't feel comfortable with, telling, like you talk about that best friend dynamic. Maybe one of the best friends doesn't like the idea that the other one likes, and they don't want to tell the other one that they don't like their idea. They like this idea. It's a good way to do it because then nobody really knows who voted for what. And because you've broken it down into so many of these little pieces, nobody really voted for anything. Everybody sort of voted for what they thought was best. So it kind of gets everybody off the hook and also gets everybody driving in the same direction when they're done. So the last thing here that I wanted to do before we finish up, and looks like we may be a few minutes early here, but every team is different. Every team's going to have that unique identity. Some teams are more serious than others. Some teams are just goofy as all get out. Some teams are really quick and make judgments. Others are more deliberate and they take more time. Whatever it is that your team has as that identity, make sure that you're helping them kind of figure that out and that they're embracing what they are and what they do. The one thing that you do want to try and influence there is that it's positive and that it helps all of them and it includes everybody. But it's something that you're going to have to help them with and help them kind of get down that road, because this is stuff that they probably aren't going to figure out all by themselves. So if you leave them to their own devices to get to this, it'll either be very bumpy when they get there or they may not get there at all. And so, the faster that you can kind of start to get this idea of what your team is and who your team is and have them start to figure out this, these processes and sort of the dynamics that that are gonna work for them, the better off you're going to be. The easier the practices get, the quicker the brainstorming happens, the better the decisions get made, and I think the better that they start to feel about being part of this team. And it really is that everybody starts to draw in. And so if you've got a team that's making good decisions and effective decisions, and maybe you got somebody that's shy, the other people might start to ask them to include them. Somebody might feel more comfortable about bringing their idea up because they've seen how it works. And it's like, all right, that worked really good last time, and everybody was being positive. So maybe I got an idea. Maybe I'll talk about it today. And that's what that makes such a difference, because it's a lot of times that the one that's the quietest has some of the best ideas, just because they're quiet and they think a lot, and sometimes they just see things differently than everybody else does, and you just don't want to miss out on that. You don't want to lose out on that stuff. It's so key. It teaches them the value of compromise. It helps them understand that the world's not absolute. I think we've all seen such a bitter political environment the last year, because everybody sees these things in absolutes and doesn't want to compromise on anything. And that's what we're trying to get them to understand, is it's not absolute. Life doesn't work that way. You got to come together. You got to work. You got to give a little bit and get a little bit and come to some place in the middle where you're all going to be better off and get to be more productive. And things will go wrong. And if your team has this good dynamic and this culture around it, and it understands this about itself, when things do go wrong, it's going to make it so much easier, because we all know that there'll be you'll be late in a practice and they're building something and it breaks or it doesn't work or just can't figure it out, and everyone's kind of getting dejected and feeling bummed. The teams that work together well will pull that out and they'll get going. The teams that don't will have like a mental breakdown at that point, and just collectively as a team can kind of turn on each other or just become very unproductive, and it just becomes a negative experience. So the stronger you can build this culture around your team, and the stronger that they embrace this positive, collaborative, compromise teamwork, the better they're going to be, and the better they're going to have as far as the time, and it'll be more fun. And then the last piece of that is certainly instant challenge. That's basically what instant challenge is. It's not about how tall can you build a tower with straws. It's about how does your team work together, and how do they collaborate, and how do they, brainstorm and come to these decisions, and then how do they execute on those things together. That's what the measure of it really is. And so if you can build this into your team's dynamic, you're just going to be better off all the way around. So Dick, anything else out there at this point?
Yes, we do have this one question, and Natalie just asked, can you give an example? And we need a little more information, so I'm going to unmute her so she can ask us directly.
Perfect.
Natalie, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thanks. The log jam, I was really hoping you could give an example of that. I think my team really needs this, and I'm just not quite clear on what you mean by the criteria and the kind of blind voting.
So, so the criteria is going to be, it's going to depend on what you're evaluating for sure. But I'll give you an example of this. I know we used to run into log jams every year when it came down to what we were going to build. My team has traditionally been a technical team. We've actually had we've had to use this log jam to decide what challenge we wanted to do a couple of years, but specifically to the machine that they're going to build. And it will, on certain years, there were very specific tasks that the machine had to perform. And some of them were fairly complicated. And so an example of criteria would be, with the 3 ideas that we have, and that's usually what we would have boiled down to is 3. I think when you just do it to 2, you run the risk of, kind of us against them sort of thing, and everyone gets entrenched and dug in. When there's 3, it sort of blurs things up a little bit. But so what's important about when we consider good and bad about this idea? And when you're building things, the complexity of it is certainly there. So how complex is this thing? From how long is it going to take to build it? Okay. When you do build this, do we feel this is going to be a very reliable idea? So reliability is another criteria. Do we know how to build this with the, based on what we have brainstormed, do we know these techniques? Are we going to have to go out and learn? Is it going to take time to learn? So, complexity. This one is going to need some electronic components. This one isn't. So cost becomes another consideration because there's other things they want to do and build and create that's going to tap into that budget. Different things like that. Then you start to look at maybe how the points get evaluated. So, certainly innovation is something. So how innovative is this idea? How innovative is this? So, innovation is another one. One of the ones that our team always kind of looks at, and when we talk about things, is the wow factor, which is, it's sort of a nebulous term, but it's really like, how cool is this idea? When you tell somebody about it, they go, wow, that's neat. Is there a wow factor to it? So rate that. And, they kind of go down through these things and sort of figure out, what are the criteria that are going to make this, that are going to make you think good or bad about this, and how do you evaluate this? So, you kind of walk them through that, help them think about it too, because they may not be able to come up with 10 on their own. You may need to sort of help them think about, what they're thinking about. Hey, have you thought about this, or this? Oh yeah, that's something we might want to evaluate. That's all right, so we're going to evaluate this. And then when you're talking about a blind vote, I would basically just, I would take my pad of paper and I would go to the other side of the room. So even if they did look up, they couldn't see it. And I would just have them put their heads down, like they're playing Duck, Duck, Goose. And okay, so we're talking about the car idea and rate its reliability from 1 to 5. And everyone just raises their hand with the number of fingers up. And then you just go around the table real quick, count the total numbers of fingers, and write that number down. So, that year we had 7 kids, so it was on a scale from 7 to 35 for every single score. And you would just start writing them down, and then when you got through all the criteria, you just got a total number at the bottom. So, A got 87 points, B got 62 points, and C got 96 points. So we're going with C. And that's, and that was the decision. And we literally, okay, that's the one we're going with, guys. We've got a decision. Here we go. So let's start working on that. And that was, it was kind of as cut and dry as that. So you talk about taking the emotion out of it. It takes all the emotion out of the decision. And that helps a lot because the kids that didn't necessarily want C, now with all the evaluation criteria, they start to see the value of it. And honestly, I personally did not share that evaluation sheet with them at the end of it because I didn't want them sort of nitpicking and digging in. Oh, yeah, but see, this one got better score here, here, and here. We should go with that. Nope. This one got a 96. We're going. And that's the way we did it. Does that help? Are there anything I'm not explaining properly? Or I guess to a degree that's enough?
That was awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Excellent. Anything else, Dick?
Nope, that's it. I don't see raised hands or anything. It looks like we're there.
Yeah. Well, I think I got like 30 seconds, so I could, I could sing a song for 30 seconds or something, but not much of a singer, so I think we'll cut it a minute early. So I will, I guess, just real quick as we finish this thing up, I do want to personally say thank you to everybody who's taken the time to manage a team out there. I have been doing this for a long time. I understand the seats that you all are sitting in because I'm sitting in the same seat right now. It's a big effort. It's a lot of time commitment. I know that your kids are getting a lot out of this, and I hope that you know that too, and I hope that you are, at least in some part and parcel, inspired by this more than you are bewildered by it, and that you feel that it's a positive thing and that you're excited to come see your kids every week. No, not every week. Sometimes it's a little tough and you're tired, but it's worthwhile, and it is an awesome thing that you're doing, and so I hope you all know that, and I hope you really do enjoy this as you go through the year. And I know there's lots of resources for everybody, so as you've got questions, reach out to your RDs and ask them things. If you've got questions specific to your challenge, use your clarifications. And I hope you guys have an awesome experience this year, and thank you again.